Imagine you're at a dinner with friends and the conversation turns to some obscure topic, perhaps the history of an old war or a technical detail about how memory works. You happen to know a little about it, something you picked up from a podcast or an article. Feeling confident, you jump in, convinced you're right. Your voice is steady, and for a moment, you even impress yourself with how knowledgeable you sound. But then, one of your friends gently interjects with a correction. Turns out you had a key detail wrong. Another friend chimes in with evidence that contradicts your confident claim. In an instant, that warm glow of certainty turns cold. Your face flushes. You mumble, "Oh, I must have misremembered," as you shrink a bit in your seat. We've all been there. That sinking feeling when confidence collapses into embarrassment. Maybe you insisted you knew the way to a party until you got completely lost. Or you swore you could fix a leaky faucet yourself, only to end up with water everywhere. Moments like these are universal. You realize in hindsight that you weren't as right as you thought. It's humbling. Once the initial sting fades, you're left wondering, why do these moments happen so often? Why do we sometimes feel so certain about things that turn out to be wrong? Psychologists have a name for this kind of misjudged certainty: the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's a fancy term for a simple idea. Often, the less we know, the more confident we tend to be. In short, we're frequently ignorant of our own ignorance. When you know just a little about a topic, you haven't yet grasped what you don't know. So, your small hill of knowledge can feel like a mountain. Then, as you learn more, that illusion of mastery fades. You start to see the vast ocean of things you still don't understand, and your confidence gets a reality check. That's why novices can be cocky, while true experts often sound unsure. For example, one man famously tried to rob a bank after covering his face in lemon juice. He believed, wrongly, that since lemon juice can work as invisible ink, it would make his face invisible to security cameras. He was absolutely sure of this brilliant plan. Needless to say, the cameras saw him clearly, and he was quickly caught. He was astonished, reportedly saying, "But I wore the juice." Now, that story is ridiculous, no doubt, but it's really just an extreme case of overconfidence from ignorance. We might laugh at it, yet haven't we all been that certain and that wrong? At least in smaller ways? So where does this blind overconfidence come from? It starts with how we understand what we know. Imagine your knowledge as a small island in a vast ocean of unknowns. If your island is tiny, you see very little of the ocean, and it feels like your little patch of land is all there is. You might assume you know most of what's important because you're unaware of everything you're missing beyond your shores. In this state of blissful ignorance, confidence runs high. We've all seen it. A first-year student aces an intro class and thinks they've mastered the entire subject, or a new employee learns a few procedures and starts telling the veterans how to do their jobs. It's that initial peak of confidence that comes with a small amount of knowledge, sometimes jokingly nicknamed Mount Stupid. But if you keep learning, your little island of knowledge expands. And as it does, so does the shoreline where it meets that vast ocean of things you don't know. The more your knowledge grows, the more you become aware of everything you still don't understand. Suddenly, you realize your once tiny world was surrounded by an immense unknown. That realization can be sobering. Your confidence might dip. You might even feel like you've gotten worse at the subject, when, in truth, you simply see more of its complexity. It can feel like going from, "I know everything," to, "Wow, I know nothing at all," in a hurry. But this phase isn't failure. It's the beginning of real learning. If you keep going, your knowledge keeps expanding, and eventually, your confidence finds a new footing. you start to build true expertise. But crucially, along with that expertise comes a deeper humility. You understand how much there is that you don't know, even about your specialty. That's why the people who know the most often speak with the most caution. True experts tend to say things like, "It depends," or "I'm not entirely sure," far more than beginners do. They choose their words carefully and acknowledge doubt, not because they're actually clueless, but because they understand the complexity. Their uncertainty is a sign of wisdom, not weakness. This idea that recognizing your own ignorance is a sign of wisdom might sound familiar. Long before psychologists gave it a name, an ancient Greek philosopher had already figured it out. His name was Socrates, and he's often considered one of the wisest people who ever lived. Paradoxically, Socrates' wisdom came from the simple fact that he knew how little he knew. There's a famous story about Socrates that illustrates this. In ancient Athens, the oracle at Delphi declared that Socrates was the wisest man alive. Socrates was puzzled. He believed he knew very little. To investigate, he went to speak with those considered wise at the time: a prominent politician, a celebrated poet, a skilled craftsman. Socrates questioned each of them about their expertise. What he found was that although they all claimed to know a great deal, their understanding was full of holes. The politician pretended to be knowledgeable about everything, but couldn't answer Socrates' simple questions. The poet could recite beautiful verses, but couldn't explain their meaning or origin. The craftsman was excellent at his trade, but he made the mistake of thinking that expertise extended to all of life's questions. One by one, these supposed wise men were exposed as not knowing what they thought they knew. Socrates realized that while these men all believed they were wise, they actually were not aware of their own ignorance. In the end, Socrates concluded that the oracle had been right in a strange way. Socrates was the wisest, precisely because he knew that he knew nothing for sure. Unlike others, he never pretended to have all the answers. He was always aware that there was infinitely more that he didn't know. This honest acknowledgement of his ignorance, this humility, was the very thing that made him wise. He embraced "I don't know" as more than just an admission. It was a philosophy. To Socrates, not knowing was not a failure or a flaw. It was the starting point for inquiry, learning, and growth. Today, we often refer to this attitude as Socratic humility or intellectual humility. It means accepting that your knowledge is limited and being willing to say, "I might be wrong," or "I don't know." Socrates basically discovered the antidote to the Dunning-Kruger effect 2 millennia early. By acknowledging your own ignorance, you guard against the illusion of false knowledge and open yourself up to real understanding. Now let's fast forward to our modern world. We live in an age of information overload, where answers to almost anything seem to be a quick web search away. Ironically, this can make the Dunning-Kruger effect more pronounced than ever. It's so easy to read a couple of articles or watch a short video and suddenly feel like an expert. On social media and TV, people often express absolute certainty on complex issues after only skimming the surface. We all know someone who reads one headline and then talks as if they have a PhD on the subject. That overconfidence flourishes in a world where a little bit of knowledge can be acquired so quickly, and the truly deep knowledge, which would humble us, takes much longer to gain. But it's not just other people, it's all of us. Each of us has our own blind spots. No matter how educated or experienced you are, in some areas, you're the novice on that little island, unaware of the oceans around you. We all occasionally get caught up in the feeling that we understand something, only to be jolted back to reality later. And that's okay. Being wrong or not knowing everything is an inevitable part of being human. So how do we guard against the trap of blind overconfidence? We can start by consciously practicing a bit of humility in our thinking. Whenever you feel certain that you're right, especially about something you only know superficially, pause and ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? Or, what might I be missing? This simple habit of second-guessing your own knowledge can be powerful. It's not about doubting yourself into indecision. It's about giving yourself a chance to correct course if needed. Think of it as a mental check-in, a way to keep your confidence honest. Surprisingly, embracing "I don't know" can be liberating. When you admit you don't have all the answers, there's a pressure that falls away. You no longer have to pretend or bluff. Saying "I'm not sure" or "I don't know" can actually feel like a deep exhale, and often people respect it. Instead of looking at you as weak, they see someone who cares more about the truth than about ego. In that honesty, you create space to learn and to invite others to share what they know as well. Choosing humility doesn't mean you should never speak up or that you can't trust yourself at all. This isn't about becoming insecure. It's about balance. Have confidence, but hold it lightly. You can say, "I believe I'm right," without insisting, "I'm definitely right." Be bold in seeking knowledge and making decisions, but be willing to adjust your views when new information comes along. Think of confidence like a strong stance in martial arts. You stand firm, but not so rigid that you can't move. A little flexibility, a little doubt, brings out the full flavor of wisdom and keeps you in tune with reality. Let's go back to that dinner table where we started. Earlier, you left feeling embarrassed after being corrected. But what if instead you had reacted with a touch of Socratic humility? Imagine that when your friend offered the correction, you responded, "Wow, I didn't know that. Thanks for telling me." The mood would shift instantly. Your friends would see you as open-minded rather than defensive. The conversation would go on, and you might even learn a few new things from the discussion. You'd leave the table a bit wiser than when you sat down, and likely with even more respect from your friends. That sure beats stewing in humiliation or doubling down on a mistaken claim. In a broader sense, this kind of humility is like a superpower in a world full of loud opinions. It allows you to cut through noise and nonsense. If you're comfortable admitting what you don't know, you're much harder to fool, by others and by yourself. You're less likely to fall for slick rhetoric or misinformation because you'll be asking questions and probing deeper. And you're less likely to become a bullheaded know-it-all yourself. Humility keeps you honest. It makes you a better listener and a better learner. In a world overflowing with information and misinformation, that is an invaluable asset. At the end of the day, all of this leads to a simple but profound realization. Not knowing is not weakness, it's wisdom. Recognizing the limits of your knowledge is itself a form of knowledge, one that many people never attain. When you say, "I don't know," you're not confessing stupidity. You're demonstrating honesty and wisdom. Paradoxically, admitting ignorance often puts you ahead of those who are falsely certain. It makes you a lifelong student, and life always has more to teach. Instead of clinging to the fragile pride of being right, you can embrace the freedom of always learning. You replace the fear of being wrong with the excitement of exploration. You approach problems and people with curiosity and an open mind, and that leads to better understanding and wiser choices. In the end, it's often in the very moment you acknowledge "I don't know" that you begin to glimpse true wisdom. And that is the wisdom of knowing nothing.